So this is the LG XBOOM XL7. Now, even though it does have its drawbacks, personally I enjoy its mellow sound profile, and I think the customizable light feature up top is a very nice touch. But today we're going to see how the XBOOM XL7 stacks up to its smaller competitors, the JBL Partybox 110 and the Sony XP500. Regarding pricing, the XBOOM XL7 has a retail price of $600, which is rather steep for this speaker. Personally, I would only pick the speaker up if it's on sale for $450 or less. But then there's the Partybox 110 and the Sony XP500, which both have a retail price of $400, but they routinely like to go on sale for $300. If you want to pick any of these speakers up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, pick up a Big Head approved hat, linked down below. We've got trucker hats and snapbacks. By buying a hat, you help the unbiased and unsponsored videos coming, and it also helps us cover more products and produce more versus videos. Thank you to everyone who's already bought a hat, and look out for more designs coming soon. Now first, let's talk about the design of these speakers. Now all of these speakers have relatively soft plastic bodies which can get scratched very easily if you're transporting any of these speakers, and they all have a thin metal grille on the front which can also get dented rather easily. Now the XBOOM is relatively larger and heavier than these other two speakers, weighing in at 34 pounds, whereas the Partybox weighs in at 23 pounds and the XP500 weighs in a little under 25 pounds. But to make up for the extra weight, the XBOOM does have built-in wheels, which makes transporting the speaker a little easier, and these wheels are decently sized, so they'll do an okay job of rolling on asphalt. Whereas with these other two speakers, you're gonna have to carry them. Now, even though I do recommend that you try to be gentle with these speakers because their soft plastic bodies do love to collect scratches, they're all rocking an IPX4 rating, meaning that if any of these speakers were to get rained on or splashed on, they'll be fine. Just remember to keep the ports panel on the back closed. And I also want to quickly point out that the 110 is the only speaker here that has a top hat mount on the bottom, just in case you want to use this speaker with a speaker stand mount. But next up, there's the light feature. Now the XBOOM has a ring light on it, very similar to the ring lights that you'll find on the 110. But I feel that the ring lights on the 110 have more dynamic animations than the animations found on the XBOOM. But I do think the ring light on the XBOOM looks better than the light feature found on the Sony. But also, the XBOOM has this LED screen on the top, which also has its own set of animations, and you can also customize it as well. Overall, I think the light feature on the XBOOM is decent, but I don't think it's as dynamic or as impressive looking as the light feature found on the 110. But I think I prefer this light feature over the more tamed light feature found on the XP500. Now, obviously, you shouldn't make your speaker purchase decision solely on the light feature, and if you do decide to use any of these light features, that is going to take its toll on the battery life. Now, when it comes to battery life, the XBOOM has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, which is very impressive. But this advertised battery life of 20 hours is with this speaker playing at 50% volume, with the light feature turned off, but with the sound boost EQ turned on, which is good. Now, the XP500 also has an advertised battery life of 20 hours, but this advertised battery life of 20 hours is with this speaker playing at 30% volume, which in general is very quiet. It's good for like ambiance, but it's not good for like actually listening to music. And in general, the XP500 is very quiet for its size when it's running off of its internal battery. This is a speaker that you're going to have to routinely use between 80 to 100% volume. But also, this advertised battery life of 20 hours is with the light feature turned off, but with the mega bass feature turned on, which again is good. And then there's the Partybox 110, which has an advertised battery life of 12 hours, but that's with this speaker playing at 20% volume, which is noticeably louder than 30% volume on the XP500, but that's also with its light feature turned off and with its bass boost feature turned off as well. Now, battery life on all of these speakers really varies depending on how you use them. If you use these speakers at a higher volume, that's going to drain your battery life. If you use these speakers with their light features turned on, that's going to drain your battery life. Or if you use the bass boost features on these speakers, that's also going to drain your battery life. But in general, the XBOOM does have the longest lasting battery life here, just because it also has a larger battery built in. Now, when it comes to connectivity, all of these speakers can be connected to two devices at the same time, so you and a friend can both be DJ, and all of these speakers don't have any latency to them. So if you want to, you can always use them to watch videos on your phone with them. Now, when it comes to audio codecs, the JBL only has support for SBC, whereas the LG has support for SBC and AAC. But then there's the Sony, which has support for SBC and AAC, but it also has support for LDAC, which is Sony's own in-house high-res audio codec. Just keep in mind that if you do want to use LDAC, you do have to be an Android user because iPhones top out at AAC. But now let's talk about the ports on these speakers because there are some major differences here. Now first, I do have to point out that the XBOOM is the only speaker here that does not have an audio jack. So you can't use it with a wired connection. And personally, I find this to be rather ridiculous because most other box speakers out there have an audio jack. But I also have to point out that the Partybox is the only speaker here that has an audio out jack. So if you have any other speaker lying around, you can always daisy chain them to the Partybox and they're going to play the same music in sync. But with all of these speakers, they all have a USB-A port, so if you want to, you can always plug in a USB stick and play music off of it, or you can always use this USB-A port to charge your own devices. But personally, I think that it's time that these speakers moved on to a USB-C port, because most phones these days just come included with a USB-C cables. Now, with all of these speakers, they have 2/4-inch inputs on the back, so you can plug in a microphone for karaoke. However, the Sony is the only speaker here that can properly drive two microphones, because with both the XBOOM and the JBL, one input is meant for a microphone and the other input is meant for a guitar. And this guitar input has more resistance to it. However, the guitar input on the XBOOM has a lot more resistance to it than the guitar input found on the JBL, because right now we're using the XBOOM and this microphone is connected to the input that's meant for a microphone, so obviously my microphone sounds good. But if we were to switch this input over to the guitar input, right now that's at max volume, so technically with the XBOOM you can really only use one microphone on it. Alright, so hold on, I'm just gonna switch this over to the proper input. So yeah, now that we're using the proper input, my microphone sounds a lot better. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the resistance on the JBL isn't as bad, so you can still get away with using a second microphone. But definitely, if you do plan on getting one of these speakers, and if karaoke is very important to you, and if you want to do karaoke with two microphones, then you do want to go with the Sony. But now let's talk about sound. Now both the Partybox 110 and XP500 have dual front-mode firing woofers with exhaust ports that shoot out the back, meaning that you can amplify the bass on both of these speakers by placing them up against the wall, and they both have dual front-mode firing tweeters. But then there's the XBOOM, which has a single 8-inch front-mode firing woofer with exhaust ports that shoot out the front, and it has dual front-mode firing tweeters. But now we're going to jump into the sound test. The XBOOM is playing at 75% volume and with its sound boost EQ turned on, which is my preferred listening method. The Partybox 110 is playing at 93% volume with the bass boost set to deep, and the XP500 is playing at max volume with its mega bass turned on.
Left uncovered, I'm thinking about four-leaf clovers. I've got composure, silver coin to hold me, turn me over right now, but expect to forget about it. What is the breeze burns gold and smoke that you've stolen? Feels like it's my fortune that you're folding. Doesn't work like it used to, as I know I remain a danger to me.
Now first, I think we need to address max volume performance on these speakers. Obviously, since the XBOOM XL7 is a larger speaker than both the Partybox 110 and XP500, the XBOOM is going to get noticeably louder than these other two speakers, and it should be good enough for up to 20-person parties. Now, the Partybox 110 gets decently loud for its size when it's running off of its internal battery, and I'm willing to say that it's decent enough for up to 12-ish person parties. Whereas with the XP500, this is a speaker that's going to leave you wanting more when it's running off of its internal battery. However, with all of these speakers, if you were to use them while they're plugged in, you're going to get a noticeable performance bump out of them. They're all going to get louder and they're all going to have more bass. And when you use the XP500 while it's plugged in, that's when the speaker starts to perform as you'd expect. Now, when the Partybox 110 is plugged in, it performs very similarly to the XBOOM when it's running off of its internal battery. But the really interesting thing here is that with the XBOOM, it's going to give you a very big performance bump when it's plugged in. Overall, just as you'd expect, the XBOOM is going to get louder than these other two speakers, but the Partybox 110 does do a good job of keeping up relative to its size. But then there's the XP500, where if you use it while it's running off of its internal battery, it is going to leave you wanting more. But when it comes to the overall sound quality of these speakers, the XBOOM leans towards a brighter sound signature like the JBL, but not as much, whereas the Sony leans towards a warmer sound signature. Overall, the vocals on the XBOOMs are very well pronounced, but the key thing about this speaker is that its bass is mostly on the audible side, meaning that the speaker doesn't have as much chest thumping or wall rattling bass as these other two speakers. Now, by no means does this mean that the XBOOM sounds flat, but this is a speaker that I would mainly recommend to someone that likes a more vocals focused EQ. And like I mentioned earlier, since the exhaust ports on the XBOOM shoot out the front, you can't do much to amplify its bass like you can with these other two speakers. And even if you were to go into this speaker's EQ and raise its bass all the way up, the bass on this speaker isn't going to give you the same physicality that you'll find on these other two speakers. Now, if you're looking for something with a lot of rattling bass, then you'll want to go with the 110 here, because you can set its bass boost to punchy and raise its bass as well, and then you're really going to feel your bass. Now, the XP500 also has a decent amount of chest rattling bass, but even if you were to raise the bass on the speaker all the way up, it's not going to match the 110. So overall, sound quality wise, I think the Partybox 110 is the most versatile speaker here, whereas with the XBOOM, the speaker has a much more mellow sound profile to it, but since it is the largest speaker here, it is going to get louder. But finally, let's talk about pairing these speakers up with other speakers. Now, with the XL7, if you have another XL7, then you can wirelessly pair them up and get them to play in left and right stereo mode. Or if you have multiple XL7s and XL5s, then you can wirelessly pair them up and have them all play in sync. And you can have up to 100 speakers playing together, which is obviously just overkill. Next up, there's the 110. Now, again, if you have another 110, you can wirelessly pair them up and get them to play in left and right stereo mode. Or you can wirelessly pair up your 110 to one other Partybox, either an Encore, another 110, or a 310, or to a 710, and you can sync them up and get them to play in sync. Just keep in mind that you cannot pair any of JBL's larger Partybox speakers to any of JBL's smaller Partyboost speakers. So for example, if you have a JBL Boombox 3, you cannot wirelessly sync it up to the Partybox 110. But, like I mentioned earlier, the 110 does have that audio out jack. So if you have a spare audio cable lying around, you can always daisy chain any other speaker to the 110, and then both speakers are just going to play in sync. But finally, there's the XP500. Now, again, if you have another XP500, you can wirelessly pair them up and get them to play in left and right stereo mode, or you can always pair your XP500 to any of Sony's other speakers that are using Party Connect, like either another XP500 and XP700, the upcoming XV800 or the XV900. But also, you can pair your larger box speakers to any of Sony's smaller speakers that are also using Party Connect, like either an XG500, XG300, XE300, XE200, or an XP43, XP33, or XP23, and you can have up to 100 speakers paired together, which again is obviously overkill. I don't expect anybody to actually do this. Just be warned, even though Sony's Party Connect is super accommodating because you can pair your large box speakers to your smaller, more portable speakers, Party Connect can sometimes be a hassle to use. Sometimes it just takes forever for all of your speakers to get paired up. Sometimes all of your your speakers don't get paired on the first time, so you'll have to go through the pairing process multiple times, and sometimes echoes do form. So personally, I do prefer to use JBL speaker pairing protocol here because it's just a lot easier to use, but it's a lot more limited. So with all that being said, obviously since the XBOOM XL7 is a larger speaker, it's going to get louder than these other two speakers, and it also has a longer lasting battery life because it has a larger built-in battery. But from a sound profile standpoint, the speaker is better suited for someone who wants a more mellow listening experience because this speaker doesn't have a ton of physicality in its bass. But then there's the Partybox 110, which can give you a mellow listening experience, but it can also give you chest rattling bass if you want it. And this speaker also gets decently loud for its size, and if you use it while it's plugged in, you're going to get more out of it. But finally, there's the Sony XP500. This is a speaker that you're probably going to have to use while it's plugged in a lot, but it's a good option if you want to do karaoke with friends and if you already have any of Sony's other speakers, big or small. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit the like button and get subscribed. If you want to pick any of the products up, they'll be linked down below. And if you want to further support the channel, check out the merch. I made some shirts and hoodies that look and feel great. And you know I can be very particular, so I'll only slap my name on something if I'm really proud of it.